Hi everyone, welcome to JUENFO Kitchen where we just enjoy food. So let's enjoy these delicious Jamaican beef patties. So we're gonna start by working on the beef filling first. I like to work on the filling first because it gives it more than enough time to cool down before we add it to our crust. So this here is 1 pound of lean ground beef. It looks a little bit pale because I gave it a quick rinse earlier in some lemon juice. So I'm going to season first with some dried seasonings, and this is salt, black pepper, and some all-purpose seasoning. Personally, I like to season my beef and give it a little bit of time to marinate, but if you prefer, you can season yours in your pot when you're cooking it. I'm also going to add a teaspoon of this jerk seasoning right here. If you're using this, it's a little bit salty, so you want to be mindful of that. By the way, I also have a homemade version of jerk seasoning, so you can check that out. I'll link it above as well as in the description below. So I'm just going to use a fork to work my seasonings throughout, and then give this a bit of time to marinate while I work on the rest of my ingredients. Now, in addition to the dried seasonings, I'm also going to do a seasoning blend. Now, essentially this is a green seasoning, so if you have green seasoning, you can use 2 to 3 tablespoons of that, or 3 to 4 tablespoons rather. For the sake of this cooking tutorial, I'm going to do it from scratch. And if you're interested in the green seasoning video, I'll also link that for you above as well as in the description. So I'm going to go in with some onion, garlic, scallion, sweet pepper, same thing as bell pepper, a couple sprigs of fresh thyme, and a half of a Scotch bonnet pepper. Beef patty always has that spicy kick to it, but if you don't like your food to be spicy, you can leave that out. A little bit of oil to blend, and this is our seasoning blend, all done and ready to use. On medium heat, I'm going to heat up about half a tablespoon of olive oil. I'm not going to do too much oil because we added some oil to our green seasoning. I'm using olive oil, but any oil you have on hand will do. Now in goes our green seasoning, and we're going to saute this for a bit. Then we're going to add our beef, which has been marinating for the past 15 minutes. And I'm going to turn up my flame a bit to high, and then stir fry this for a few minutes. And we're going to cook our beef for 10 to 15 minutes. Remember, it's ground beef, so it doesn't really take that long to cook. And just use your spoon to break up any of the large chunks that you might see. So I'm going to reduce the flame back down to medium. And continue stirring. So I'm going to go in with a couple tablespoons of ketchup. And some browning for color. Some dark soy sauce could also give you that brown color if you don't have browning. Alright, so our beef is now done. I've turned my flame off and I'm going to allow it to cool. Now at this point, you might see that there is still some amount of liquid. Some people sprinkle a little bit of breadcrumbs in order to reduce this. However, I find that as the beef cools, it reabsorbs the liquid. So I recommend leaving it to cool, and if there is still liquid, then you can add the breadcrumbs. I find that if you add the breadcrumbs before, then the beef becomes a little bit dry, and we want a juicy beef patty. We don't want our patty to be too dry. And as I always encourage you guys, just taste your filling and see if it's according to your preference and adjust if necessary. So I'm going to allow this to cool while I work on the crust. Alright, so for our dough we have 3 cups of all-purpose flour here. Our flour doesn't have to be sifted because we're going to be rolling out the dough later on. I have both butter and shortening here. So this crust is a type of short crust pastry, which means that it has a lot of fat. And the fat is what gives it the crispiness and flakiness. So I have half the amount of butter and shortening here that I'm going to use, and the other half is in the freezer, because I'm going to be folding that in the dough later on, as you will see. And I recommend using a good quality butter, not margarine. The butter gives it a much better flavor and crispiness. I have some ice cold water here. We need our water to be ice cold because it keeps the fat from melting so that the crust can stay crispy. To our flour, I'm going to add some salt, some onion powder and garlic powder. We have added onion and garlic to our filling, so why not carry over some of that flavor into the crust as well. Some brown sugar, baking powder, and the turmeric, which is what gives it that golden color. So I'm going to use a whisk to thoroughly incorporate our ingredients into the flour. And after that, we're going to add the butter and shortening. So you can use a fork, or if you have one of those pastry cutters, you can use it to incorporate the butter and shortening into the flour. But the best way I find to do this is to cut them up into small chunks and then use your fingers to work them into the flour. And we have to work a bit fast because, as you can see, the fat is already starting to melt. So with clean hands, of course, I'm going to break up or break down the fat into the flour. And your flour should resemble breadcrumbs when you're done. So this should be the texture of the flour once we're done. As you can see, it looks like breadcrumbs. So now we're going to go in with our ice water to form the dough. And you pour your water in gradually. So we knead our dough until it's a little bit soft but not sticky. Doing it this way leaves a little room for the flour that we're going to add when we're rolling out the dough. Now I'm going to wrap the dough in plastic wrap. And let it rest in the fridge for 20 to 30 minutes. Alright, so my crust has been in my fridge for a little over half an hour and now it's ready to go. So I'm going to be rolling it out on my countertop here, which I've already cleaned and sanitized. It gives me the most surface area to work with. I have everything here that I need lined up and ready to go. My bowl with some flour, my rolling pin, the rest of my butter and shortening. I decided to leave the shortening out at room temperature because I find it easier to work with that way. But the butter remained in the freezer. So I'm going to flour my surface, a little on my dough, my rolling pin, so I've rolled this about 1/4 of an inch thick, and now I'm going to add my butter. And this is the reason why I froze the butter earlier, so it's easier to grate. And in my opinion, this is the best way to do it. So unlike me, you might want to add the shortening before the butter. So now I'm going to fold my pastry up. And then roll this out again, and this is what creates the air pockets that gives you the flakes. And you add your flour as needed. So now I'm going to use a 7-inch pot cover. I find this most convenient to cut out my individual patties. Add a little flour to my plate and just rest them on here until I'm ready to use them. And these are about 1/4 inch thick or a little bit thinner. So we're going to repeat the same process until we have gotten all our rounds. Overall, I was able to get 7 patties. My kitchen is a little bit hot, so I'm going to leave them in my fridge for another 10 minutes before I stuff and bake them in order to prevent the butter from melting. Now we're going to fill our patties, and as you can see here, our filling is nice and cool. I didn't add any breadcrumbs to it. The beef soaked up all the moisture once it started to cool down. At this point, you want to go ahead and preheat your oven. I've preheated mine to 400 degrees Celsius. So we have our crust here. Now I'm going to spoon the filling to one side. And make sure that you leave some room around the edge. I'm going to dip my finger in some water here. And then we have our perfectly shaped Jamaican beef patty. So I've laid these on my baking tray here lined with grease paper. And just before I put them in my oven, I'm going to brush on some egg wash. And all this is just 1 egg beaten with 1 tablespoon of water. And what the egg wash does is to give the patties a nice sheen after they're done baking. After 40 minutes at 400 degrees, our beef patties are now done. These beef patties were simply delicious. The crust was so flavorful and flaky, and the beef filling was so juicy and flavorful. I hope you get a chance to try the recipe. Leave me a comment below and let me know what you think, or if you have any questions, you can ask in the comments as well. Please like, share, and subscribe if you haven't yet subscribed. And let's get to our first 1,000 subscribers. Follow me on my other socials, which are also linked below. Thanks for watching, and until next time, live life to the fullest and just enjoy food.